Charlemagne, king of the Franks. Who was Charlemagne? What would he accomplish and what would distinguish him as a leader during his reign and during his lifetime? In this audio episode we will explore Charlemagne, taking a look at the leader and his exploits. As we dive deeper, we will take the time to look at several aspects of his life and the impact that he would have. From his early days, to the impacts events in his childhood would have. We will also explore his parentage, siblings and family, as well as some of his education and the impact it would have on his later years, if any. We will in addition take a look at the events that would occur in his youth, up to the point in time that he would ascend the throne along with Charlemagne and how events would unfold following this period. In addition to this, we will also take a look at the death of Pepin and some of the things that would occur in its wake. Charlemagne would have a large impact on the domain that he would come to rule, making massive changes and making an impact on the lives of those who resided in the domain. We will take a look at some of the events that would occur during his reign as well as some of the battles, some of the strategies used, the individuals involved, as well as the outcomes of the battles as we explore more on the topic of Charlemagne. Thank you for listening to this podcast. I hope you enjoy it. Charlemagne was king of the Franks, a title that he would occupy for several decades during which many events would occur, in both his life and in the history of the kingdom. In this role, he would be succeeded by Louis the Pious. He would also have other titles, amongst them would be the title of King of the Lombards and the Emperor of the Carolingian Empire. In the former he would spend decades in the role, like he had in the role of the King of the Franks, and would be able to impact changes and oversee several events. Under his reign, several important and crucial changes would occur that would change the European landscape for decades and centuries after, setting the tone for events that would follow long after his death, and determining the future and fate of many people that would follow. In this audio podcast, we explore the story behind the man, and explore aspects of his personal life, his motivations, the changes he would implement, and the extents of his legacy. We start with who Charlemagne would represent. He'd be a child of Pepin the Short and Bertrand of Laon, and would play a role in major changes in the European continent during the Middle Ages, a period that would see battle after battle fought and would also see several key developments and changes. Looking at a timeline of events, 687 would see the eventful, momentous and impactful Battle of Tertry, which had involved significant individuals the likes of Pepin of Herstal and Bertrand, and would occur in Somme. Events had occurred in 681 that would have some bearing on those that would unfold here, and those had involved Pepin II and Waradin, and had seen a conflict that had involved the two come to peace. The conflict that would occur in 687 in Somme, and that would go on to have somewhat of an impact on the events surrounding it, would involve Austrasia and Neustria. Pepin was the mayor of the Palace of Austrasia and Berkel was the counterpart for Neustrasia. The events that would occur during the battle and their outcomes would have a bearing on the power of several individuals as well as some territorial consequences. King Theuderic III would also be involved. The Austrasians and Pepin would emerge from the battle with the victory over the Neustrians and Berchar. The event would have important consequences for the future of both powers, seeing a swing in the power dynamic between the two, and also setting the tone for changes that would occur later on in history and would involve the Merovingians, and somewhat of their decline in power. A deeper look into the Battle of Tertry. Battle of Tertry. The Battle of Tertry occurred in 687 and would have political aftereffects. It would see the involvement of Berchar and Pepin of Herstal. Present as well would be forces of Austrasia and forces of Neustria and Burgundy. Some of the ramifications would surround Berchar and would see Berchar lose power. They would also see another rise in the form of Nordebert. Some of the ramifications of the battle, however, would be felt at a later date and would not necessarily be felt then and there. The fate of the Neustratians would be affected in some way following the battle, and events that had occurred and the outcomes of the battles would find themselves affecting numerous people in numerous ways. After the conflicts, Pepin would carry on undertaking other actions that would further cement his power. The death of Pepin would occur sometime in 714, and in his place as Duke and Prince of the Franks would be his son Charles Martel, who would continue to have an eventful life filled with many changes. King Theuderic IV dies in 737. 741 would see the death of Charles Martel, son of Pepin, which put an end to a life that had been eventful and impactful and had started all the way back in 688. It had seen many changes that would reverberate for many more years after. Charlemagne I and Pepin the Short take over in 741 and start their own story of their reigns. They give to Childeric III the kingship of the Franks in 743, but his rule would end in a way that would see him removed from the throne and the kingship being taken by Pepin, years after the death of Charles Martel and the placement of Theuderic III to the throne. The move would occur sometime around 751 or 752, and accentuated the life of Pepin, which had started in 714. In this role of king of the Franks he would be succeeded by Charlemagne. Political moves would be undertaken by Pepin to increase his power. 748 saw the placement of Duke Tassilo as leader in Bavaria. He would be relevant to several events in the future. His father was Duke Odilo of Bavaria and his mother was a daughter of Charles Martel by the name of Hitrude. He would be accused at one point in time of being involved in events that would see the city of Bolzano attacked, and this would not be the only time that he would come to be accused of similar actions. Pepin has a son called Charlemagne in 748. Charlemagne probably spends some of his time as a youth in Pepin's court where he is educated. 754. Possible anointment of Pepin as king by Pope Stephen II. A general period would occur that would see Pepin involved in a campaign against Aquitaine. Aquitaine would be associated with individuals the likes of Duke Hunald and the likes of Wildfar, who would be the Duke of Aquitaine over some period of time. Events during this period, and around the year 761 would see Charlemagne join Pepin in this campaign, which would be significant for some of the events that would occur during it and in the general period. For one, the year 768 would see the death of Pepin, the son of Charles Martel, and father of Charlemagne and Carloman, the leader who had made several impacts and had been involved in several events during his life. Charlemagne and Carloman ascend the thrones and positions that were left by their father. A coronation occurs for the two brothers, but separately. Two locations would have some significance in these events. The locations would be Nguyen and Soissons, and the event would occur sometime during the year 768, which to some extent represented somewhat of what would follow. Charlemagne would rule places like Austrasia and Caraman, was given Alemannia and other regions. Aquitaine remained an issue, as it had for their father before them. The momentous campaign against Aquitaine would see several events occur during it. It would see them march together, but by the end of the battle, things would change. At some point in time Duke Hunald would be caught by Charlemagne, which would be a significant event. Events that would occur would lead to rising tensions between the two brothers. Pope Stephen III is made the Bishop of Rome. Several events would occur during this period in time and during his life. His time would begin around the year 768 AD. The brothers would be influential and would play a role in some of the affairs that concerned Pope Stephen III, as we will see somewhat later. Marriage between Desiderius' daughter and Charlemagne. Desiderius was the Lombard king. Their marriage would be broken in the future after Carloman's death, and when the widow of Carloman fled to Desiderius' courts. The marriage would have some political objectives. It had occurred sometime around 770 and would be annulled in the future. Son of Charlemagne, Pepin is born in 769 or 768. His mother is Hermotrude. He would continue to be involved in several events throughout his life. 771 would see the death of Carloman. The year 771 would also see Charlemagne become sole ruler, as king of the Franks, as well as a marriage between Charlemagne and Hildegard. From it several children would be born, amongst them Charles the Younger, Pepin of Italy, Gertrude, Louis the Pious and several others. Campaigns that would occur in the general period would include war against the Saxons, which would last for a while. Charles, son of Charlemagne, is born in 772 AD. He would live to around 811. He would occupy several roles and undertake several actions during the extent of his life, but he would die before his father. 772 would also see the death of Pope Stephen III, who had been involved in several events to do with the kingdom. He would be succeeded in his role by Pope Adrian I. Issues would arise concerning some territory and land, and previous events that had occurred in the past had seen some of the land that was in the possession of the papacy become captured by Desiderius, who was king of the Lombards. The desire of Pope Adrian I for these lands back would set in motion some events that would find Desiderius and Charlemagne on a course of collision. One that would eventually involve troops, who found themselves making their way across the difficult Alps. Other events that would occur prior to the movement of troops had included some attempts at diplomacy. 773 saw the siege on Pavia. Pavia was the capital in Lombard. The siege of Pavia 773 to 774. The siege of Pavia would see conflicts between the Franks and Lombards and the involvement of several prominent individuals. It would occur sometime around 773, lasting months until around 774. It would see fierce fighting between forces. Desiderius, who was king of the Lombards, would be involved along with Charlemagne. It would occur amidst tensions between the Lombards and the Franks, and would occur after the death of Charlemagne, co-ruler of Charlemagne. Some of the events that would occur would affect and involve his family. Several events would follow which would eventually see Desiderius in Pavia and his son, Adelchis, fleeing to Constantinople. Several other events would eventually see the surrender of the city, the capture of Charlemagne's family, and an attack on Verona which had influenced Adelchis' son's flight towards Constantinople. Within the city, famine would also develop, which would have an impact on events. Several events would occur following this. The year would also see a force to Verona to capture the city. Adalgis, a son of Desiderius, is able to escape. He would be important in the future, playing a role in a plot to undo the power of the Franks, but dies before some of the events would have occurred. Charlemagne celebrates Easter in April 774 in Rome, in the wake of the several important events that had occurred and had included events like the siege that had taken part in Pavia, the fleeing of Adalgis, and several other events. During this general period as well, Charlemagne would come to meet with Pope Adrian I, and several events would occur during this period as well. Whilst this occurred, some other events would still occur in the background. Pavia surrenders June 774. Some of the events that would occur in its wake include changes in power. Some aspects of it would be quite novel, and would see some transfer of power. Amongst some of the changes would see Desiderius is removed from throne, and Charlemagne ascends. The Franks are able to counter-raid, continuing the conflict between Charlemagne and the Saxons, which had seen some actions earlier on in the reign of Charlemagne. At some point in time there would be a rebellion by Duke Harajad of Friuli. Northern Italy in 774 would see the Lombards removed from power. 775 would see the birth of Gertrude, daughter of Charlemagne. She would be a daughter of Charlemagne and Hildegard. Her siblings would include the likes of Louis the Pious, Pepin of Italy, and Bertha. 776 would see a campaign against the Saxons that would yield numerous different outcomes. Some of the outcomes of these campaigns would include changes in land and in the status of some captives. Other events would follow in the years that would come. Some would concern the Saxons and would see Charlemagne's rule accepted by many of them. The 777 assembly at Paderborn would be an example. Several individuals would be present at the assembly, and other events outside of the Saxon wars would have some level of relevance to affairs there. 778 would see the Battle of Roncesvalles Pass. A deeper look into it. Battle of Roncesvalles Pass 778. A mountain pass would be the site of an ambush against some of Charlemagne's forces, which would occur in 778. Several events would occur following Charlemagne and his army start on their journey towards France. Charlemagne and his army would be followed by the Basques as they left the region and made for France, and the army's rear would be attacked. Several prominent individuals would be there, and would see action during the events that would follow. The move would be somewhat unexpected, and the Basques would be able to cause damage to Charlemagne's forces despite some apparent disadvantages on their side. Which isn't to say they had no advantages. Many casualties would be endured by Charlemagne's army, seeing several troops fall in the fighting, but parts of Charlemagne's army would still be able to escape. Lost to the army as well was some baggage along with some of their resources. The events had occurred along a mountain pass and had followed several key events like the invasion of the Iberian Peninsula, which had seen many events and characters involved over their course, as well as the destruction of the Pamplona city walls. Several prominent losses would occur during the Battle of Roncesvalles Pass. The end result was a Basque triumph, and numerous casualties and material losses for Charlemagne and his forces. Some of the individuals present would go on to achieve some acclaim. Some of the events that had occurred in the period surrounding it had involved individuals the likes of Thalaba ibn Obaid and the Umayyad Emir of Cordoba. Prior to the battle, Charlemagne would have done at least two things. One involved the appointment of several individuals into some positions, and the other would involve the establishment of several counties. Charlemagne had also been involved in activities across Spain, entering places like Barcelona and Girona. Events would also see a siege of Saragossa occur. Charlemagne would then undertake actions that would help to aid his position within the region. Other events that would find themselves occurring in the same year as the Battle of Roncesvalles Pass would be the birth of Louis and Lothaire, twin sons of Charlemagne. Several other events would happen, and some of them would involve Saxony. Some Saxon raids would take place sometime in this period and would see Saxony have an army sent out to it by Charlemagne. All these events would happen whilst other events were occurring. Birth of Bertha, daughter of Charlemagne, in 780. She shared in the parentage of several of her other siblings. At some point in time, several events would occur in the life of Charlemagne which would see him renamed, baptized and anointed. Pepin would be another name he would come to be called by, a name that had previously had other notable individuals associated with it. General period would see some changes in some positions and in the lives of some of the children of Charlemagne. Crowning of Pepin and Louis, they are supported by regents as well as advisors in their respective domains which they are given. Pepin is king of the Lombards, Louis king of Aquitaine. They would go on to participate in the history of the future. General period would also see the betrothal of Gertrude, daughter of Charlemagne, to Emperor Constantine VI, which would be broken sometime in the future. The cause could be speculated to be due to some events that occurred when his mother, Empress Irene, failed to call Charlemagne to the Second Council of Nicaea would take place in the year 787, and would see several developments come from it. Gisela, daughter of Charlemagne, is born 782 AD. Death of Hildegard would occur in the year 783. The woman who had been by Charlemagne's side for a long period and would be the mother of several notable individuals, playing a role in several events during that time. Several other deaths would occur in the period after, including that of Charlemagne's mother, Bertrada, which would also occur in the year 783. Several events would occur that would concern the Saxons in some way or the other. Events like those in Thuringia in 784 would occur, as well as the issuance of the Capitulation de Partibus Saxoniae. Other events would also occur in the year 785, which would be particularly important for the Saxon Wars. Some events take place in the Duchy of Benevento, as it would at one point in time see the presence of Charlemagne, as he marched into it around the general period. Duke Arichis would also find himself surrendering. The general period would also see a meeting or meetings between Charlemagne and Constantine envoys. Events surrounding Bavaria and Duke Tassilo would at some point in time see the latter surrender to Charlemagne. Bavaria is eventually annexed into the kingdom, and there are conflicts against the Avars at several points in time. Amongst changes in the legitimacy of Charlemagne's relationship with Hermotrude, his son Pepin loses his land and becomes involved in a plot against Charlemagne. However, the plot is thwarted. Several fallouts would come as a result of the plot, and numerous of those involved would have their fate sealed. Council in Frankfurt in 794. Several changes occur, including monetary changes and developments in ecclesiastical issues. A concord established, which would occur amidst other events and would not be an isolated occurrence, and that some other events would lead to it. Some building would also occur. Conflicts against the Avars by Pepin of Italy, which would have some consequences for both parties. 786 would see an event that would lead to several changes. Formal peace would be achieved between Charlemagne and the king of Mercia, Offa. This would have an impact on several other people. Pope Leo III and Charlemagne meet each other in September 799, amidst several other events that had occurred in the year, which had concerned Leo, including an attack on him. 800. Pope Leo and Charlemagne meet again after several events take place in the life of the former. 801. Barcelona is captured. The event would be part of several other events that had occurred and would involve the Carolingian Empire and the Emirate of Córdoba, seeing the involvement of several individuals the likes of Louis the Pious. 802. Capitulare Missorum Generale. It had content in it that would impact several aspects of life for numerous individuals. General period would also see a change in power occur in Byzantium, and this would have some impact on future events. Irene is removed from power. Nikephoros I ascends. He is opposed to Charlemagne, and conflicts arise between the two empires. Some of Charlemagne's lands are raided by Danes around the same time that several other events are occurring. The period would just be around the start of the 9th century. Talks occur and fail between Charlemagne and King Gudfred, the Danish king. 806. Charter division Regnorum defines succession, and its contents would have an impact on several individuals. Amongst some of them would be Charles, Pepin, and Louis. 808. Numerous events would see the involvement of Gudfred in some Slavic tribes, and would see a response coming from Charles the Younger. Gudfred and the Slavic tribes had found themselves active in Obotrite lands. Several other events would occur surrounding it in connection to this. Death of Gudfred in 810. 810. Constantinople receives envoys from Charlemagne seeking peace. Nikephoros I dies in 811, but peace is achieved through the actions of Michael I. Charlemagne throughout his reign implements a lot of changes that would transform the landscape in Europe in several spheres. These include the worlds of the military, administration, and governance. Charlemagne makes changes in his will amidst the death of several people in Charlemagne's life, including his son Pepin the Hunchback and Charles the Younger. 814 would see the death of Charlemagne. Throughout the history of Charlemagne, some wars and conflicts would come to span several years and would involve numerous individuals over a large territory and space. One of these wars would be the Saxon Wars. We will go into some detail about them here. Saxon Wars from 772 to 804. There would be a collection of battles and conflicts that would occur under the reign of Charlemagne and would take place over decades. They would see many events concerning them, which included events like raids and Saxon surrenders amongst them. Other events would also occur during this period that would concern Charlemagne and the realm that he had come to rule. The events of the Saxon Wars would occur over a large area and see several events occur. Involved in the fighting would be the Saxons, the Frisians, and the Carolingian Empire. The fighting would see figures like Charlemagne take up a role, seeing conflicts that would see fierce resistance from the Saxons. Several actions would occur over the course of the wars, with events surrounding a church called the Church of Deventer being a contributor to the events that would occur over the course of the wars and determining the future of several individuals and regions. The event had seen the Saxons involved in the burning of the church. The Franks would then move to invade territory belonging to the Saxons, reaching several positions in Saxon territory. Several Saxon locations would be attacked during the course of events. Opposition would continue even when Charlemagne would have to attend to matters surrounding his war with the Lombards, and several conflicts would still go on for a period after and would see the involvement of several significant individuals over the course of a conflict that would change history. Westphalia would be a focus at some point in time, seeing the attacks of the Franks, who would achieve some success, being able to gain some victories. As they achieved these victories, some of the people they would win against would be converted to Christianity, and eventually the territory under Charlemagne would grow. Several other conflicts would ensue, until a period of peace was achieved. Charlemagne would implement several changes in regards to the Saxons, including changes surrounding the law, and also politics. Some of his changes would not be popular with them, which would cause a revolt to surface, and numerous events would follow. One of them would be the Battle of Sunto. A period of conflicts would occur lasting years, and would see Minden see the presence of Charlemagne for a while. Several other events would still occur during this period, and some of them would lead to peace and revolts. Throughout the extent of the wars, Charlemagne would spend some time elsewhere, including periods of time where he would find himself in Italy. Another conflict of interest that would occur would be called the Avar Wars. The Avar Wars 788 to 803. Events during the Avar Wars would see many changes occur, including territorial changes that would eventually see a gain in the territory of the Franks. The Avar Khaganate would find itself involved in the wars, which had found their beginning roughly around the year 788. The conflicts would also involve Francia and saw the involvement of several individuals in events that would have an impact on numerous people and would play a role in the future of several individuals. The conflicts would follow a history of conflicts between the Avars and the Franks that had started decades and centuries earlier. It would also follow other events in the history of the Franks. For example, the Siege of Pavia, a siege which had seen conflicts between the Franks and the Lombards and had occurred around 773 to 774, seeing fierce fighting amongst forces. The surrender of Desiderius would eventually come along with the capturing of Carloman's family amidst several other events. Other events would have occurred in the general period, like the Saxon Wars, which would be a collection of battles and conflicts that would occur under the reign of Charlemagne and would last over a long period. It would come to stretch over decades in the history of the realm, occurring over a large area and seeing several key individuals involved. Playing a part in the fighting would be the Saxons, the Frisians, and the Carolingian Empire. The fighting would see figures like Charlemagne take up a role, and would also see conflicts that would see fierce resistance from the Saxons against the actions of the Carolingian Empire. Several events would occur in the Saxon Wars over their course, and at some point Westphalia would be a focus. It would see the attacks of the Franks, who would achieve several victories followed by some intervening periods of peace. Surrounding events would eventually cause concern for the Avars, who would eventually find themselves occupying some territory, after which they'd find themselves withdrawing amidst several other events and issues. Some of the territory that they had invaded had included places the likes of Italy. Negotiations would occur but fail, after which the Khaganate would be invaded by Charlemagne, which would have to see forces attack from different directions. The events would see the involvement of Charlemagne's son, Pippin of Italy, who had grown up from the young boy. Pillaging would also occur during the events, as well as other situations that would occur over the course of the wars. These would find themselves eventually ending with territorial changes and victory for the Franks, in a conflict that had seen the involvement of several key individuals and would continue to have several and varying degrees of consequences for those involved. Several individuals over the course of history would also be of interest, and we will look briefly into them here. Pepin the Short. Pepin would be at some point in time a mayor of the Palace of Neustria. He would be king of the Franks from 751 to around 768. A role in which he would achieve many things. In this role, his son Charlemagne would follow him. He would die in 768. His own father had been Charles Mantel and his mother was Gertrude of Espay. He would co-rule with Charlemagne, his brother, a reign that would see several revolts that would occur by the Bavarians and other groups. Pepin would at some point in time become the sole ruler, and would eventually rise to become the king of the Franks with the support of certain individuals. He would undertake several changes, amongst which were changes in the law, and would also be involved in several wars that increased the territory of the Franks, being involved in several conflicts with various groups, and gaining the loyalty of several groups as well. His reign would also see him involved in conflicts with Ashtulf the Lombard king. Ashtulf's father had been Duke Pemmo of Friuli, who had been involved in several events throughout his life, playing a role in the history of that time. His brother Ratchis would eventually abdicate from the throne, which would lead several consequences, amongst which were that Ashtulf himself would become king, and under him lots of expansion as well as several raids that would target different parties would occur and would have an impact on the history of the time and of the region. Some of his demands would be unpopular with certain people, including those in Rome, leading to Pope Stephen II's appeal to the Franks for assistance, setting off events that would have an impact on events even long into the future. 754 would see the departure of Pepin, and his eventual arrival in conflict with Ashtulf, followed by demands on Ashtulf which Ashtulf would go on to refuse. Several interactions would eventually see a treaty which would be broken, prompting the return of the Franks. Ashtulf would eventually die in 756, and with his death, other changes would occur. Carloman, brother of Charlemagne. Carloman was a brother of Charlemagne and son of Pepin the Short. The same Pepin the Short who had been involved in the history of the region in the time. Carloman would rule as king of the Franks from 768 to around 771. Born in 751, he would also be the son of Bertrade of Laon. The territory he would rule would include areas like Languedoc, Burgundy, and Alemannia amongst other territory. His relationship with his brother would see the pair involved in some conflicts and come to head at times. He would die in 771. Duke Harajad of Friuli. His life would have many events occur, and at least one of them would see him come to a conflict with Charlemagne, and would see changes take place in Friuli. He would be Duke of Friuli over a period of years, and at some point in time he would rebel. Several events would occur following this, including a conflict between him and Charlemagne that would end with Charlemagne emerging victorious, as he would in many of the other conflicts that would occur over their lifetime. Other events would also see several individuals gain positions within Friuli. Gertrude, daughter of Charlemagne. Gertrude would be the daughter of Charlemagne and Hildegard. She would be born around 775 and live up to around 810. She would receive an education. Her and the Byzantine Emperor Constantine VI would at some point in time become betrothed to each other, though it would not reach reality as it would eventually find itself broken. Irene would be the mother to Emperor Constantine VI and would at several points in history play a significant role in the history of events that would surround this time and impact numerous individuals. She would eventually find herself replaced in her role. Duke Euricus's father would be Duke Liutprand. The year 734 would be the year that would see Duke Euricus' birth. He would live a life that would see several events take place. He would be the Duke of Benevento, and would eventually marry a woman who was daughter of a northern Lombard king, Desiderius. Desiderius would find himself involved in several conflicts with Charlemagne. He died in 778 after a life that had seen many events take place. Irene of Byzantium would be born sometime in the 8th century, would live within Byzantium and act as the regent, co-empress, and other roles at various points in time during her rule, making several changes and overseeing several important events. She would also come to interact with several individuals during her lifetime and would have an impact on their future. She was married to Leo IV and would give birth to Constantine VI, for whom she would act as regent. Her reign would be filled with several important changes, amongst which were several developments in several areas, though several revolts and controversies would occur as well. Her husband, Leo IV, would rise to the throne in his 20s following the death of his father and would carry out changes of his own. He would be born around 750 and would die at the age of approximately 30 in 780. His father had been Emperor Constantine V. His father would die during a campaign, after he had already been made co-emperor. Leo would be involved in raids against Abbasid Syria, and would claim at least one victory against their army. At some point in time, a plot against Leo would be discovered and some of the plotters would be punished. Some of the events that would occur during his reign would involve individuals the likes of Lac-Anadra Khan. Irene would become regent for her son Constantine VI, who would be quite young at the point in time that his father had passed away, which had been around 780. A role in which several events would occur whilst she occupied it. King Gudfred, the Danish king, under whom several events would occur. Gudfred would be a Danish king, his reign would follow that of Sigfrid and would last from around 804, stretching some years. Horik I would be his son, and during Horik's reign several events would occur. Gudfred would be involved in conflicts with the Carolingian Empire. Conflicts that would have an impact on history. His nephew King Hemming would follow him and rule. Gudfred would have numerous children and many of them would in some way come to wield some power. He would die in 810. That marks the end of the audio cast into the life of Charlemagne, looking at some of the challenges and experiences that shaped his life as well as some of the events that would occur during his reign in both the domain that he ruled and in some of the regions that he would interact with throughout them. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave a like and subscribe to the channel for more.